We're going to focus on a period of time when the satanic war against the Jews will reach its greatest single extent. The period was simply called the Tribulation, the Great Tribulation. That God has an overall prophetic program which we often subdivide into three distinct plans, because God has a plan for the church, He has a plan for the Gentile nations, He has a plan for Israel. Whether we speak of God's plan for the church, the nations, or Israel, all three of God's plans somehow focus upon His plan and program for the Jewish people. Now in this hour, we're focusing on the period of the tribulation, which will fall upon the whole world in general, and in fact all people living on the earth at that point of time. There are three major purposes why God is bringing these conditions in. Now the first purpose applies to Jews and Gentiles equally, which is to bring an end to wickedness and wicked ones. To bring an end of wickedness and wicked ones. That applies to both Jews and Gentiles equally. As far as the second and third purpose, they do directly relate to God's program for Israel, and so we'll turn to, for the second purpose, to Revelation chapter 7. Revelation 7. The Matthew 24:14 passage on your notes points out what Jesus said, that the gospel will be proclaimed to all nations throughout the whole world before the end comes. And the one statement He makes in Matthew 24:14 is now given a full chapter of exposition. In that, verses 1 through 8 spell out the means of the proclamation, while verses 9 through 17 deal with the results of it. Chapters 6 through 9 deal with events of the first half of the tribulation, and so this second purpose, to bring about a worldwide revival, will occur in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. Verse 1 says, "After this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind should blow on the earth or on the sea or upon any tree. And I saw another angel sent from the sun rising, having a seal of the living God. He cried with a great voice to whom the 4 angels were given to hurt the earth and sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of them that were sealed, 144,000, sealed of every tribe of the children of Israel." Verse 5, 6, 7, 8 go on to list 12 tribes, repeating 12,000 from this tribe and 12,000 from that one. The grand total comes to 144,000 Jews. If you release these 144,000 Jews, the gospel will be proclaimed throughout the whole world before the end comes. Looking at this from a human perspective, if I wish to conduct a worldwide revival in a short period of time, like 3.5 years, I could not think of a better group of people to use for that purpose than Jewish people. So again, by means of these 144,000 Jews, God will proclaim the gospel throughout the world. As many of us learned rather early in our ministry, it's one thing to proclaim the gospel, but the reception of it is quite another. And what will be the results of this proclamation? Verse 9. After these things, after what things? After 144,000 of verses 1 through 8, I saw and behold a great multitude which no man could number, out of every nation, of all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, arrayed in white robes and palms in their hands. Now skip down to verse 13. One of the elders answered, saying unto me, These are arrayed in the white robes, who are they, and whence came they? And I said to him, Lord, my Lord, you know. He said to me, These are they that come out of the great tribulation, for they washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. What John sees next is myriads and myriads of Gentiles standing before the throne of God, Gentiles who have come out of every nation, every tribe, every language group. When the question is raised as to the identity of all these Gentiles, the answer is, these are the Gentiles who have come out as believers from the tribulation, for they washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. As a result of the preaching of 144,000 Jews, myriads of Gentiles will come to saving faith. And this will accomplish the second major purpose of the tribulation, to bring about a worldwide revival. Now this revival will be so extensive, with such a tremendous success rate, will create a deep sense of envy on the part of every Baptist evangelist you ever have met or will meet. We may see local revivals in our day. We may even see national revivals in our day. By the time the Bible speaks of worldwide revival, is going to be conducted by these 144,000 Jews. Now for the third purpose, we'll turn to Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12. The third major purpose of the tribulation is to break in pieces the will of the holy people. To break in pieces the will of the holy people. Verse 5 of chapter 12. Now beginning in chapter 11 of this book, the prophet has been given a vision in which he can see what conditions would be like for his people, the Jewish people, during the time of the tribulation. And the vision that began back in chapter 11 continues into chapter 12, terminating with verse 4. Now in verse 5, a question will be raised as to just how long will these terrible days be allowed to continue. And when the answer is given, he'll give us the third purpose. Verse 5, Then I, Daniel, looked and behold, there stood at the tomb, the one on the brink of the river on this side, the other on the brink of the river on that side. And one set of men clothed in linen was above the waters of the river. How long will it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand unto heaven, and swore in the story of never, that shall be for a times and a half. And now notice, and when they are made an end of breaking in pieces the will of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. These terrible days must continue till finally the will is broken, until they turn away from trying to establish their own righteousness and seek the righteousness of God through Jesus the Messiah. Now, well, verse 7 gives us the purpose. Going back now to Ezekiel chapter 20. Ezekiel chapter 20, Ezekiel tells us the means by which this third purpose will be accomplished. Ezekiel chapter 20 and verse 33. Ezekiel 20 and verse 33. Begin at verse 34 rather. I'll bring you out from the peoples and will gather you out of the countries wherein you're scattered, with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, with wrath put out. I'll bring you into wilderness of the peoples, and there will I enter into judgment with you face to face. Like as I entered into judgment with your fathers in the woodland of Egypt, so will I enter judgment with you, says the Lord Jehovah. And I'll cause you to pass under the rod, and I'll bring you the bond of the covenant. I'll purge out from among you rebels and them that transgress against me. I'll bring them forward out a land where they sojourn, but they will not enter into the land of Israel. You shall know that I am Jehovah. But by means of the tribulation judgments, God is going to break the will to bring them to repentance. So we can redefine the third purpose to be to bring about Israel's national salvation, to bring about Israel's national regeneration. Insofar as the three major purposes of the tribulation, then, the second and third purpose directly relates to God's program for the Jewish people. The second part of our study for this morning is how the Jews relate to the beginning or the start of the 7 years. And we'll go to Daniel chapter 9 as our first of two passages. In Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27, we are given Daniel's famous prophecy of the 77th, the 490-year period God has decreed over the Jewish people. It goes beyond our purpose to go through the whole passage phrase by phrase. For those of us involved in Jewish ministries, as I am, it's one of the more important passages to know well, because it contains the only prophecy that gives us a timetable for the first coming. But as you work your way through it, what you learn is that by the time you come to the end of verse 26, the first 483 years of this 490-year period has already been fulfilled in history, coming to an end at the time of the first coming. But there's still 7 years left to run of this prophetic time clock over Israel, the same 7 years as those of the tribulation. Now the question is, what will be that one singular event that will begin the 7 years taking away, which brings us to verse 27 of Daniel chapter 9. And he shall make a firm covenant for many for 1 7, In the middle of the 7, he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And upon the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, and even to the full end of that determined shall wrath be put out upon the desolate. The 7 years begin with one decisive event, which is the signing of a 7-year covenant between Israel and the Antichrist. It will not be the rapture as such that will begin the tribulation. I firmly believe the rapture occurs sometime the tribulation starts. Maybe just before, maybe 10, 20, 30 years before. We simply don't know. The starting point of the tribulation is not the rapture, but the signing of this covenant. Until this covenant is signed, the tribulation cannot begin. The pronoun he goes back to his nearest antecedent, which is found in verse 26 as the prince that shall come. In other words, the prince that shall come in verse 26 and the he who makes a covenant in verse 27 is the one and the same individual, but are known now circles simply as the Antichrist. Now, the tribulation begins with the signing of a 7-year covenant. This presupposes two things already in place. One is and one is not. First of all, this presupposes there is a Jewish state with a Jewish government where a covenant like this could be signed, and that has been true as of 1948. Biblically, because the rapture was always imminent, the rapture could have come before 1948. But the tribulation could not come before 48. There's no Jewish state with a Jewish government with whom a covenant like this could be signed. The second this presupposes is that the Antichrist is already in high political authority with whom a sovereign state like Israel could sign a covenant of this nature, and that is not yet in place. Secondly, although the covenant is made to last for 7 years, it won't make it through the 7-year period. At the halfway point, 3.5 years after it's made, it will be broken. And the breaking will be marked by a forced cessation of the sacrificial system. And thirdly, the result of breaking the covenant will be desolations falling upon the Jewish people. Now, this covenant is viewed by Daniel 9:27, is viewed from a human perspective. From a human viewpoint, it will be looked upon as a 7-year treaty. It simply will not last as long as it was intended to. Our second passage, Isaiah chapter 28, will give us God's perspective on the covenant that triggers the tribulation. Isaiah chapter 28. There'll be two different political situations or circumstances in the 7-year tribulation, one for the first half, one for the second half. Now, the political situation for the first half of the tribulation will be that of 10 kingdoms and 10 kings. And what we shall see is a restructuring of the borders of the world as we have them today. We have some 180 plus nations today. But there'll be a restructuring that the whole world will be divided into 10 nations with 10 kings ruling them, and these 10 men will rule co-equally in the first half of the tribulation. That will change at the midpoint. The Antichrist will then declare war against all 10 of these kings. In that war, he will kill 3 of them, and then the other 7 will submit to his authority. He will then inaugurate the second political system, which he will be the one world political ruler. By the same token, we'll see under point 2, 2 world religions, one for the first half, one for the second half. And the religion for the first half is found in Revelation chapter 17 in terms of the ecclesiastical Babylon. We shall see someday unification of all the false denominations, all world religions, into a one world super church. And this one world church or one world religion will rule the world religiously for the first half of the tribulation. True believers that will not subject themselves to its authority will suffer persecution, and many will be martyred. But I'll also change at the midpoint, and after the Antichrist gains world political authority, he will then destroy this one world religion, take over the Jewish temple, seat himself in it, proclaim himself to be God Almighty, and call upon the whole world to worship him as God, and to signify their acceptance of his deity by taking the mark of 666. And so the religion of the second half will be the worship of the Antichrist. And so from the midpoint of the tribulation until the end of it, one man has ruled the world both in the political sphere and in the religious sphere.